Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, so you don't have to be. Well, welcome to another edition of our long-running podcast about musical theatre here in Britain and elsewhere in the world. In today's programme, we're going to be looking at one of Cole Porter's major shows, and then later in the programme, we're going to revisit that issue that I raised a few weeks ago about the separation of pop music from musical theatre in the 1950s as a direct result of rhythm and beat. But first, let's start with a question. If I were to ask you to name a Cole Porter show just off the top of your head, what would you go for? Well, chances are you'd have gone for one of two different shows. You probably will have picked either Anything Goes from 1934 or Kiss Me Kate from after the Second World War. Now, I think it's fair to say that those two shows are undoubtedly Cole Porter's most famous shows, and indeed in terms of revivals on Broadway and in the West End, I think they're definitely the shows that people go to the most. We recently had Jubilee come to London, but that's a rare visitor. That's once in a lifetime, to be honest. It hadn't been on in London since the 1930s. And really, when was the last time you saw The Gay Divorce as a stage show? You've probably seen the film, The Gay Divorcee, renamed after film censors decided that it was impossible to have a gay divorce. Although, for some reason, having a happy divorcee from that process, perfectly acceptable. And I think it's going to be a very long time before anyone sees a revival of Red Hot and Blue. So Anything Goes and Kiss Me Kate are the two main musical shows from Cole Porter's reign, if you like. Well, today we're going to be talking about the former of those. Kiss Me Kate, being based on The Taming of the Shrew, is a post-war musical and, unfortunately, to my mind, whilst being brilliant and having a wonderful score, falls very firmly into the post-war problems of musical theatre from America, which is, I'm afraid to say it, what's known in the trade as Rodgers and Hammersteinism. Yes, when Oklahoma came along at the beginning of the 1940s and said, right, stop being funny and take yourselves seriously and take everything stately and slow it all down and generally make it much less fun and portentous and even pretentious, then go right ahead. Well, unfortunately, that's what the rest of musical theatre did. Irving Berlin, who'd been doing such light and bright things before the Second World War, came in with Annie, Get Your Gun. Yes, it's a musical comedy, but it's no musical comedy like any of the shows he'd have turned out before the war, and the same's true of Cole Porter. Kiss Me Kate, based on The Taming of the Shrew, it's an excellent show, the score is wonderful, but it's very steady. It's very slow, actually, let's be brutal. It's not a screwball comedy, it's not a light piece of fluff. It wants you to take it seriously, although as Cole Porter is involved, the level of seriousness is several steps up above that Oscar Hammerstein was welding into his works. But it isn't Kiss Me Kate that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Anything Goes. And the smart amongst you will say, oh, but surely that's the third name for that particular show. Wasn't it originally called Crazy Week and then renamed Hard to Get? Well, yes, how clever you are. You've probably been reading the same research I have in various books. Well, what do we know about Anything Goes? It's a 1934 musical, and it had a very difficult birth, which is amazing when you consider how popular it is today. I think it's Cole Porter's most popular show, and it's a show that seems to be revived more often than not over any other of the works in his canon. Cole Porter joined the production pretty early on when the book was still being written by Guy Bolton and P.G. Wodehouse of Jeeves and Wooster fame. And their original story was set on a gambling ship, which then has a shipwreck. And of course you've got a closed set of characters on that ship, and it's all about how they're thrown into each other's stories and what happens next. Unfortunately, just before the show went into rehearsal, 134 people died in a fire on a cruise ship. And so obviously that story had to be completely jettisoned. And a new one was created in double quick time by the director of the show, Howard Lindsay, and a friend of his by the name of Russell Krause. And they managed to knock up Act 1 in 10 days, and then spent the time that the cast were rehearsing Act 1 to write Act 2. Quite shortly, you'll hear an interview between me and a gentleman by the name of Chris Henry, who's involved in a new production of Anything Goes taking place in North London. And we're going to be discussing Anything Goes, this truly spectacular and popular show. But there is something you need to know about this show, which I think if you're British you may not realise, and that is it was always considered to be a satirical show. Now, it isn't a satirical show when it's on in London, because we have a different historical context to America. We don't have a great history of Puritanism, and when we do have it, it doesn't go very well, thank you very much. Certainly in this country, Puritanism can certainly be said to be one of the major causes of our Civil War. But in America, of course, Puritans were the founding fathers, the Pilgrim Fathers, in fact, who went over to America in the Mayflower and several other ships at the beginning of the 17th century, and to this day there's still a strong streak of Puritanism in American culture. And so in 1934, when Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss, along with Cole Porter, were writing the story and the songs for Anything Goes, they decided to make it satirical about where America had got to in the 1930s, which, remember, of course, followed straight on from the Roaring Twenties, if you like, the watershed of the new liberalism. Skirts were going up, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, you understand. Organised crime was taking root and indeed was being glamorised. It was fashionable, it was cool. All the things the Puritans would have disliked seemed to be happening. Authors were losing their decorum and looking to street culture, if you like, for some of their tableaus, for their books, which ultimately gives us Guys and Dolls, of course. Thank you very much, Damon Runyon. But to a sensitive, puritanically minded American, this would have all been the path to degradation, and of course was not acceptable. Unless you were one of the people at the vanguard of this new liberalism, and the gay spirit of Cole Porter, and I mean the word gay in both its senses here, were clearly going to fall on the side of saying Puritanism was now outdated and unnecessary. Let's look at the words of his title song for Anything Goes. It sets up its stall in the opening verse. It tells you what the show is going to be about, in fact. Times have changed, first three words, which, as well as anything else, tells you what the show Anything Goes is going to be about. And we've often rewound the clock since the Puritans got a shock when they landed on Plymouth Rock. So there we are, we're talking about Puritanism, they are expressly mentioned. But what happens then? Here today, any shock they should try to stem, instead of landing on Plymouth Rock would land on them. It's a clever rhyme, it's a clever throwaway, it's a nice bit of Gilbertian topsy-turvyism actually. But the point is, it's talking about a society that the Puritans set up, which has been turned on its head, and that's where we are in 1934 America. And Cole Porter is very strongly in favour of all these new things. So that's the verse. Let's listen to the chorus, where he goes on to explain how this topsy-turvydom had come about. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking, and so it was. But heaven knows, anything goes, which once you've lived through the age of the flapper in the 1920s and the shorter dresses, showing leg for goodness sake, then it's true. The idea of covering up the demure woman was outdated by the 1930s, it was outdated by the 1920s. So Cole Porter is saying, look, see how far we come from our Puritan roots. Same with the next line. Good authors too who once knew better words now only use four-letter words writing prose. Well, that relates to the new gangsterism. And then he goes on to give you all the topsy-turvy back to fronts. Black's white today, day's night today, all those kind of things. And then, of course, the chorus finishes with the words, anything goes. Nothing could be plainer about what this musical's about. So, as I say, to British ears, and particularly in the 21st century, the idea of anything goes being anything other than a bit of light 1930s fluff and nonsense is hard to understand. But in its original context, it's a satirical musical, supporting liberalism and modernity over stuffiness and the general po-facedness that comes with Puritanism. And I think that now sets the context for this next discussion about Anything Goes with the very charming Chris Henry. Musical talk.
My name's Chris Henry. The show I'm involved in is Anything Goes. My involvement in it is that I'm the publicity officer, so I basically promote the show, and I'm also performing in it. I'm part of the male quartet, which is pretty much like a quartet of male sailors, similar to a barbershop quartet.
But we're tap dancing, I believe.
And I am tap dancing as well. First time for me in about 10 years doing it, because I did my first ever production was 42nd Street. So,
oh, right, which is tap heavy rather.
Yes, and this one has been quite the workout. Anything Goes has, yeah.
So let's talk first about Anything Goes, the show by Cole Porter, 1934. Why did your group, and what's the name of the group?
The Finchley and Fryne Barnet Operatic Society.
Which is North London for those people who don't have the decency to know where you are. What drew you to this show? I'm going to talk a bit later on about why this show's an evergreen and a perennial. But what drew you to it? Because I'd like to find out if my theories are going to be proven correct.
Okay. Well, I would say it's a kind of a classic vintage show that has kind of kept its quality throughout the years. It's popular. It's got popular tunes that everyone knows, because obviously there are some musicals where you mention it and thinking, oh, I've never heard of that, or what's that song? But obviously Cole Porter is pretty much universally well known. Also, what we do, we try to do shows which will attract a lot of people. So
commercially minded of you.
Exactly. So the more cast members, the better. And obviously there's a lot for chorus involvement, and there's a lot of principals. Particularly, there's also a lot of male principal involvement, and that's something we always try to attract, because we don't want it to be too female heavy all the time.
Well, you're right about that, of course, because choruses are often made up of ladies, but you're right, you've got a whole host of sailors and
Yep.
on-board passengers, and of course a number of them are going to be men. I hadn't stopped to think about that, yes, because it is a large cast, it's an ensemble piece in many ways. I suppose it does draw in the larger operatic groups and drama groups purely because you've got something for pretty much everyone to do.
Yeah, I think that's the whole purpose of amateur theatre, really. Not everyone can have the solos or have the big moments, and they want to do shows because it's kind of a community thing. They want to obviously share the experience with other people, and so they want to be in big shows where there's lots of opportunity for them to just kind of get stuck in and just have fun. So I think that's what's made it popular, and also you'll notice a lot of actual other companies around the UK are going to be doing this show as well. You notice trends. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned an interesting word, I thought, which was quality. You said it's a show that's retained its quality. What are the qualities, plural, that you think it has retained? Because, do you know the story of how it was written?
I know it involves an anecdote about a journey on a boat, isn't it? Or someone who took I don't know who it was. Someone got the idea. You're going to have to help me out here.
Well, you're quite right. Someone suggested it as a good idea for being on a boat as a nice concept for a musical. They originally brought in one British writer, P.G. Wodehouse, for people, and a chap called Guy Bolton, who's American but who come to live in Britain to write the original story. And their original story, for which Cole Porter had already bought into to write songs for and started writing songs for, was about a gambling boat, which they used to have in those days, a ship on which gambling is to take place. And it's being shipwrecked. That was the sort of general conceit. And Cole Porter started writing songs for this, and it went into production. There were some questions about whether the libretto was a good idea, whether that was a good story or not. But unfortunately, the whole story was rendered completely useless for the stage, because just before they went into proper production and rehearsal, there was an appalling maritime disaster where 130 odd people died in a fire on a boat. So it's only really a comedy about a shipwreck. Suddenly it didn't seem so good an idea. The authors weren't available, so the director stepped in to write the book with somebody else, and they wrote Act 1 in 10 days. So it really is a kind of, what songs have we got, what sets have we got, what can we do with it? And then they wrote Act 2 whilst Act 1 was being rehearsed. So that's why I'm so interested in the idea of quality, because yes, what I think its real quality is its score. But is the plot any good? You're tapping your way through it at the moment. You must tell me what you think.
I think the plot sometimes it's quite difficult to follow, but I can kind of compare it as I don't know if anyone's watched it, The Importance of Being Earnest. If you could compare it in terms of like a musical version, because there's a lot about mistaken identity. It's kind of farcical in sense. It's very sort of fast-paced. Lots of things, kind of punchy dialogue. Everything's happening, but you're kind of following it. But it's kind of implicit, really, kind of almost like a subconscious thing. But what you're finding, obviously, if it's performed well, it's very humorous. It's very
it's certainly a funny piece.
Yeah.
I think of it almost as a throwback to 20s musicals, because even in the 30s, where popular plots in musicals weren't particularly heavy, in the 1920s they were very light, and this feels very light to me. And it is really just a way of pinning the songs together. It's all about several different couples on a boat, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also what's kind of appealing about the music is it's very light-hearted. It's kind of merry, which I think sometimes you want from musical theatre, because obviously there's some musical shows out there like, I don't know, which are fantastic still, like Rent, or
very different to Rent,
or Les Miserables, where it's fantastic and the music can give you goosebumps, but sometimes it's all a bit too intense and a bit kind of thing. But whereas something like Anything Goes, it's very guilt-free, and it's just something you can just really enjoy and listen to.
It is actually, this is an unusual phrase to use, but in the 1930s meaning of the word, it's very gay. But it is, it's sort of light and airy and fluffy. And,
yeah, exactly.
And as you say, free of angst.
Yeah, it's just happy. It's one objective is just for you to enjoy it, really.
Would it surprise you to know, though, that it was considered really satirical, certainly in America? I don't think the satire works in Britain. Did you know that?
Would it be sort of the comparisons to Moonface, maybe?
Well, it's funny when it came to Britain in 1935, I think it was.
Okay.
It was all sold about this is the American idolatry of gangsters, and the culture of the time was Al Capone. Well, it's a bit earlier, but that had all been put into films. But actually, apparently, the reason that the Americans, certainly at the time, considered it to be satirical, and I didn't know this until recently, was because it's actually it contrasts religion with a secular state, and it was all about how the secular state had taken over from the original Puritanism of the American ideal, as was originally. And so you've got the criminal coming on board dressed as a clergyman, and of course Reno Sweeney is originally she's supposed to be a religious singer.
Yeah, she's a sinner.
Who then goes on to become a chanteuse. She gives up the religious singing in order to become a nightclub queen, as it were. And there's lots of that kind of stuff. So oddly, I mean, to me, I can't see that satire at all, but I don't come from an American context. So I don't think of it as a satirical programme at all, a satirical show at all. I consider it to be just a piece of old fluff, really.
Yeah, I would say, looking at it, I suppose you can have that deep analytical view of it. That what you're saying, it absolutely makes sense. But I think it's poking fun at things, and it's just silly humour at the end of the day. So,
but let's talk about the score then. You said it was upbeat, but it's quite contrasting, isn't it? I mean, let's talk about the nuggets, the lollipops. I mean, as you said earlier, it's got some of the big. It's almost like a Cole Porter songbook. I mean, he did write lots of other songs for other shows, but there are so many hits. You're the Top, I suppose, is probably the most famous. Now,
yep.
What is the best way of performing that, or how has your group decided to go with it? Because, I mean, I appreciate it's a comic number, but is it because it's the secondary comic couple rather than the principal romantic couple, isn't it?
Yes. So we're talking about. So what version are we talking about? Reno and Billy here?
Well, right. Let's.
Because again, this is how confusing the plot is.
Let's talk about the version you're doing, and then we'll talk in a minute about the variants on that.
Okay, right. So You're the Top, our version, is Reno and Billy, because Reno obviously has feelings for Billy. It's performed...
Well, he's much younger than she is.
That's true. It's
dirty lady.
I think actually throughout our production, it's quite fast-paced choreography. Our choreographer, David Adams, I think he's always known for just having very kind of complex, original, entertaining choreography, and where there's supposedly the old saying where you can fit 2 steps into something, he'll try to fit 5 into something. So, yeah, it's very hard work, I would say.
But it's a very odd love song, isn't it? Because it is a love song.
Yeah, it's
a devotional song in some sense. But it almost throws it away with its silliness.
Yeah, it's kind of got that kind of sort of pizzazz and pace about it, and almost like something you would hear someone like Frank Sinatra kind of sing in a very kind of crooner, but a more sort of upbeat, pacey kind of way. So,
did you know? I mean, apparently, once again, you probably know this story, but it was apparently written after a dinner party that he'd been to, where he and the hostess just spent the evening trying to out-top each other with ridiculous rhymes. Hence, all the rhymes you find it, Colosseum and Louvre Museum. And so he went away and thought, what a jolly good idea for a song, and then wrote the song. I don't think she ever got any royalties, but then again, I don't think she was asking for any. But he actually also thought it was never going to be a success, that song. He just thought, because it's so obviously a trick,
Yeah.
It's, if a verse after verse after verse, it's just ridiculous first rhyme followed by ridiculous second rhyme topping it. So he thought it would get very boring very quickly, but it seems to have really lived on forever. I mean, when you know Louis Armstrong's been covering it, you've pretty much made it, I think.
Oh yeah,
not that Cole Porter will prove it to anybody. But.
No. Oh, I mean, obviously the other song is "Dear Lovely," which I know is covered regularly by Robbie Williams because he's a big fan of Cole Porter. So I think there's definitely a legacy there in his songs. Yeah.
Which is ironically not in the original version. Which brings
I do believe that. Yeah, I've heard that. This is
now we touched upon this, so we probably ought to clarify. The original show 1934, but the version you're doing is a revamp, isn't it?
It's the 1987 Beaumont version. We had to be very specific about that in our promotional.
What does Beaumont mean in this circumstance?
I don't know. I just think that's what it's named after, because in terms of in terms of who owns what, in terms of the copyright of it, in terms of book and composition, and
it's just a shorthand for that particular.
Yeah, it's just a shorthand.
Because it was revived on Broadway in 1987, and it was rejigged basically from the original.
Yeah.
Did you know by the son of one of the original, the director who'd stepped in to rewrite the plot at short notice, worked with a collaborator. It's the collaborator's son who then did the 1987 revamp.
Oh, I did not know that. No.
So it's all in the family.
Okay, cool.
And that has made a big difference, hasn't it, between... well, you said you were looking at your version, and tell the story about writing the synopsis for the programme.
Yeah, so obviously with me being doing publicity, I'm kind of responsible for the copy of the programme, and you have to do those kind of very arduous tasks of... to obviously inform the audience when they buy a programme to make it worth their money, a synopsis, and I pretty much did the lazy thing and looked on Wikipedia, and the main plot that was produced there, I was sort of just borrowing the text and just kind of rejigging it, and as I was sort of reading it and writing it, I was thinking, something doesn't sound right here, in terms of, I don't remember that being in our production, and...
Did it really sink in 1912 with most of the male members of the crew?
And just other things about this happening, thinking, okay, that sounds familiar, but then something about them being half naked and thinking, oh god, that's not in our show.
Maybe it ought to be.
Yes, it perhaps. And so yeah, after much searching, I found the correct version, the 1987 version, and had to reach the revamp.
And are you able to give us some of the differences? I mean, the thing. I mean, let's be honest. Let's put it in context. The 80s was a great period for reviving shows, but then using them as a smorgasbord for their composers' other work. So you had all these Gershwin shows like Crazy for You, which was based on an original Gershwin, Girl Crazy, but then they shoved in all these Gershwin numbers from lots of other musicals into it, and pretty much all the other Gershwin shows ever since then, they've done that exactly. And it's the same for this in a way. It's got most of the original score, plus quite a lot of new alternative co-porter jemmied in, really. It's been crowbarred in. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of differences, I believe, what we sort of talked about in terms of the romantic thing, I believe the version we've got is where Reno ends up with Evelyn. There's a romantic...
Evelyn being a gentleman,
or who is courted to Hope, who wants to be with Billy.
Yep.
But I believe there's the other version is Moonface and Reno being the love interest. So yeah, in terms of new songs, again, my history of it is it's not as probably as good as yours. But
let's find out.
I know that. I know there's a song in there that Hope sings in our version, which I believe Moonface sings in another version.
They're very different characters, aren't they? She's the sort of young ingenue sweetheart, female heroine, if you like, and he's Public Enemy number 134 or something.
Yeah, and Public Enemy number 13. So I know that there's some differences there. I know the Anything Goes version in our one is slightly different in terms of the dance break. It still is intense in terms of choreography, and but I know, for example, the 2011 revival, which was on Broadway, is a much longer dance break, and it's something like ridiculous, like 7 or 9 minutes long, and it looks amazing if you do it on YouTube with Sutton Foster. But our one is about 5 minutes, so.
It's funny, actually. I think that very much sums up the different generations of Broadway musicals anyway, because they've obviously just recently revived How to Succeed on Broadway.
Yep, that's right.
So How to Succeed in Business on Broadway,
yep.
That's what I was going to say. Did you see what I did there? And it's very clear that they pumped in an awful lot more dance into that as well. So dance is obviously having a revival in big musicals at the moment, whereas in the 80s, it wasn't quite so important. It was about shoving in the extra songs. So, you can see all these trends. So I'm interested in that. I've got to ask you the question about I Get a Kick Out of You.
Yes.
Have you retained the cocaine reference from the original version? Or have you gone for a bebop refrain?
No, from what I've witnessed at rehearsals, there is the cocaine reference. So
so you are retaining some of the originals, because a lot of... this is interesting, bearing in mind that Cole Porter was being so satirical with his writers about Puritanism in America, that a lot of people now don't sing the reference to taking cocaine and getting I took even one sniff. It will bore me terrifically too. So I salute you for your...
thank you.
You're having a pop at the Pilgrim Fathers without realising it.
Obviously, North London Musical Theatre is not as PC as other areas.
So, but forgive me, we just named some of those songs there immediately. Yeah. But what about the more romantic numbers, or the All Through the Night? It's actually sort of oddly sensual when you look at the lyrics. I mean, there's if you like, dreadful thing to say, a clean way of looking at it, and a slightly filthier way. You know, the clean way is that it's a romantic ballad about how I yearn for you throughout the night.
Definitely.
But actually, if you look at the lyrics very plainly on paper, it is all about you bring me ecstasy and I yearn for you all through the night. And you can read it as though the couple are in bed, rather than one of them isn't there and you're just thinking about them in the middle of the night. And it's quite a sort of rich brew when it comes to the melody, I think, actually. It's quite... It feels sumptuous. So, you know, and that feels quite, you know, there are these Cole Porter moments which are very different to his usual kind of tickety comedy, Gilbert and Sullivan style light lyric.
Yeah.
How does that sit in the piece?
Well, All Through the Night is actually a number I'm involved in as part of the Mel Quartet. It's almost like a love letter. It's where Billy is...
Rather than the French letter, which is what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's he's in the brig, he's imprisoned, and obviously it's come to that realisation that Hope yearns for him, and it's... I would say, listening to it, it's kind of got that sort of old school sentimental romantic feel to it, and I wouldn't say it's kind of, from our version, it doesn't sort of have that kind of hint of sensualism. I suppose it is, again, you've got to kind of look very deeply into that and into its lyrical content.
If you sang
exactly.
it separately from the show, I think it would come across very differently.
Definitely.
The situation it is supposed to illustrate in the piece.
Yeah.
So what's your involvement? You're in the chorus. So how does the chorus bring it? Let's talk about how you're staging this then.
Okay, well, we will have two sort of steps. I'm using my hands here, but obviously that's not very helpful. We've mainly...
But if our listeners wave their hands now, they'll be able to live what you're doing.
So yeah, it's mainly just sort of two stairways sort of on each side of the stage, and that's kind of sort of the main sort of backdrop of the boat. Kind of how many other kind of companies have set it. Sort of the main big chorus numbers are Bon Voyage, Blow Like Gabriel Blow, Anything Goes. We have a lot of kind of chorus involvement and participation in terms of reaction, because obviously there is a lot going on, and even if it's just sort of the chorus kind of dressing the stage, that is very important, because I think for our production, one of the members who's directing it, it's his debut as directing, and he's approached it with real enthusiasm and excitement, but I think he would have wished for a smaller cast, because having to kind of handle all those kind of cast members and kind of plot them here and just like, all right, you've got to walk on here, react to this, and, you know, in the background, and it's pretty much everything's always going on. It's a working ship, so to speak. So yeah, so something's always happening. It's always, you know, moving.
There's
so.
business.
Yeah.
But in the song All Through the Night, you said you're part of a chorus of four. What do you bring to that number itself?
Well, this is actually quite different, interesting, because
it better be.
we've just had a last-minute change of choreography. So how we've done it is that Billy is singing it from the brig, kind of almost like reading the love letter and singing, imagining that Hope's there. Obviously, he's singing to Hope in his mind, and sort of Hope's in the background. What originally we were going to do was have the four male quartet dancing with the Reno's Angels, and almost this kind of sort of like in the dance break, almost like a waltz section. But what we've then done, because the harmonies are so difficult, because obviously it's barbershop quartet, it's bass, baritone, tenor and low tenor. I'm baritone. So for that one, I'm actually I've got most of the melody, so I just sing along with Hope, which is kind of easy. But what we've done, we've dressed one of the stairs, almost like how you would expect a barbershop quartet to be, kind of all in a row and just sort of like, you know, like a chorus kind of thing. But what we've done with the choreography, because we thought it'd be too difficult doing all this kind of waltzing and concentrating on the harmonies, we've got some of the other sailors to dance and waltz with Reno's Angels, which I might also mention we've got 5 of the angels.
5 angels in the quartet, so there's 1 angel spare, is there?
Yeah.
Musical talk. Now, you've mentioned Reno and her angels, but of course, Reno in America, of course, is where the quickie divorce. She's actually named after the divorce capital of America.
Okay.
And indeed, I don't know if you know, there was an American gossip columnist called Walter Winchell, I think
Okay.
his name was. And whenever he was trying to hint in the newspapers that somebody was going to get a divorce, some celebrity was going to get a divorce, he always used to say that they were going to renovate.
Okay.
He was a very strange man. And he gets mentioned, he was a friend of Cole Porter, so he's mentioned in an awful lot of songs. This character, Reno Sweeney, is, in many ways, she's the biggest character in the piece. I mean, it's the star role, actually, historically. It was Ethel Merman originally, and Elaine Page saw the 87 version and loved it so much she arranged to have it. I believe she produced it with her then husband Tim Rice, so that she could star in it. You know, the only way you can absolutely guarantee you're going to be in it is to buy it. And so it came over in '89, I think, which is when Elaine was in it. EP. How does that feel in an ensemble piece? You know, it's very clearly a star vehicle on Broadway in the 30s and the 80s, and again last year, a couple of years ago. Does it upset the balance, or is it one of these roles that can be sort of gauged up to be a star value piece, or gauged down in order to make sure it doesn't outshine everyone else in the production?
Well, I think our Reno is fantastic. She's a fantastic singer, and she holds the stage really well. She's got great presence, but I think equally there's so many other strong performances. Like our Whitney is hilarious, our Moonface is brilliant. I watched Friendship, the number the other day.
Another insert, by the way. Did you know that? Not in the original,
Okay.
Not in the original.
Wow, and that there's just chemistry between them was fantastic, and I think just equally, just across the board, there's all just a fantastic array of performances. I think even like Luke and John, they can steal the show.
Now, Luke and John, we ought to say briefly, were originally Chinese shipmen, aren't they, I believe?
Yeah, they're Chinese converts.
Yes, they were rather more broadly drawn, should we politely say, and they weren't known by any Western names. They were given them fake Chinese names.
Yeah.
So well done on going for the modern version there, if I may say.
Right.
You were saying about, actually that it isn't, each of the characters are given so strong in the new version. Do you think that's rewriting the new version that there are more songs in it, therefore there's more for everyone to do?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. There's, I think every principal kind of has a chance to shine, really. Like even Lord Evelyn, who you'd think,
he's a sappy British.
He's a complete stereotype. Talks with this very English aristocratic kind of
American view of what an aristocrat speaks like.
Perfect.
Yes.
But he's got
quite.
But he's got a great song in it, Gypsy and Me, which again the difference was Hope. That was a song by Hope, wasn't it?
I think you're right, actually.
Yeah, but they've tweaked it for this version
and resexed it.
Yep, and it's him. And again, our Evelyn is fantastic. He's throughout the show, his Britishness shines through, and it's hilarious. But for that number, he's fantastic. So.
I think you're right, by the way. I think we have so much to claim that it is the 87 reworking that has done this, but it's taken down the Ethel Merman-y nature of it and revved everybody up to a plane of the principles. Because I'm just thinking, actually, since the 80s revivals, when it comes around, because it was on in London for 2003, 2004, something like that.
I believe so, yeah.
And of course, the star who came out of that wasn't the actress playing Reno, it was the man playing Billy Crocker. It was
John Barrowman.
It was you said those words. The British musical talisman that is Scottish-American singer
John
Barrowman. And that's really interesting because if I say, can you tell me who the Billy Crocker of the 1930s or even the 1987 version was? I can't. So
no, I can't.
No, so it's obviously, as you say, it gives principals an opportunity to shine much more equally now.
Definitely. Yeah, it's. I know from the 1987 version with Elaine Page, I think Bernard Cribbins was also in it as.
He was.
I think, was he Evelyn, I believe?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, so those kind of roles, whereas Billy was like, you'd think, a big role, but no, not heard.
The lovely and brilliant Bernard Cribbins was going through a right period of doing musicals, because I saw him in the early 90s at the Open Air Theatre in Regent's Park.
Okay.
When he was in a 1920s musical, Lady Be Good. And he was playing Wally Watkins, a wise-talking American kind of sort of streetwise chap who'd probably be played by Phil Silvers if it was on in the a Bilko character. So obviously he was having a good musical time at the time. The ghost of Ethel Merman does hang around this piece, though. That's a sentence you don't get to say very often. Would you say that your production has been able to avoid Mermanisms and the echoes of La Merman, or do you think it's actually sort of, that's half the fun and you have to embrace a bit of Mermanism? As in the Song of Merman. Oh, that's a different musical entirely.
I mean, if you're thinking of sort of traditionalism, I would say, I think, yeah, we try to regain that. I don't think we're ever... I think with all shows that we've done, we try to sort of treat it with how it deserves, really, with what the score deserves, with what the piece deserves, what the characters deserve. We don't try to be too outrageous or contemporary, I suppose, is the word. So you haven't
reset it in a Foreign Legion?
No. It's.
But do you go to the text as written and the songs as written, or do you actually think, I have seen an earlier version, I'm going to let this colour my productions? Or is it a little bit of everything?
It's a little bit of everything. I mean, I know we've tried to sort of get into the whole habit of speaking in the kind of like American accents, but kind of like the kind of lazy Americans. So we've got a dialect coach who kind of helped us a lot with.
Do you now? That's very good for an amateur.
Well, she's actually behind the chorus, and she's trained in in dialect. And she's just advised us in terms of how to say certain words, like, seashore.
It's real Joycey stuff.
Yeah. I won't try to do the accent.
You're going to be the one performing, aren't you? Can we not hear a little?
Oh, perhaps not. I'll save it for
you're such a timid actor. But that's really interesting. But presumably that's for the kind of sort of the comedy American characters. Billy Crocker doesn't speak like that, does he? I know he's a little bit. He's rough compared to Hope's ingenue nature. But do you not find, unless the characters are full-on comedy characters like Moonface Marty, where they are expected to talk, but it's really full-on. The others have to be. Does it destroy their credibility if they have too much of an accent, I suppose?
I guess
extreme accent.
I guess so. I think you don't want to get too carried away with it, really. You don't want to detract from the performance as itself, really. And I mean, as long as there's chemistry there, which I believe there is in our show, I think that's what's really important. So and the vocal performance, really, and just believable, really. So we try not to let it sort of propel into kind of stereotypes or fastness. So, but yeah, just keep it on a level playing field.
Let's get back to the songs. What have you learned about Cole Porter just from the practice of singing his songs? Are there any surprises, either lyrically, musically, or in performance?
I would say, musically and performance, firstly, it was quite a surprise musically with amateur musical theatre. How you do it is punch it out like line by line, and it's like, okay, so tenors, bass, sopranos, altos. But for this one, what our musical director, from interpreting the sheet music and the score, was we're going to have sopranos, tenor 1, tenor 2, baritone, bass. I think I've named them all. I could be wrong there. Could be just one tenor. But some of the ladies have fallen into tenors, and yeah, I think it's just sopranos are just
better than bass anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they could get that low. For some of the actual vocal lines, they've included, it's a bit of mix of late female and male voices, which is really interesting. And performance-wise, it's fast. I think diction is really important.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to lead on to that in a minute. But carry on.
But so at this point, with like so many weeks to go, our musical director is pulling us up on, like, okay, you've got to make sure you're not mumbling stuff and just being clear. Exactly. But for example, for Anything Goes, you have that 2 minutes of dance break where all the tap dancers are tapping their hearts out and probably sweating stone away, and then it's that classic da-da-da-da-bum, and then you've just got to start singing, and by about after the second or third line, you're just like,
where's my breath?
Yeah. So that's hard work.
It's aspirational and perspirational.
That's yeah.
Yes. What about the lyrics? Do you still, Cole Porter is identified as being one of the cleverest, they say brittle and sophisticated sort of lyricist of the first 50 years of the 20th century, and renowned for being funny. How do you find his work?
I don't find it complex. I think it makes sense in terms of there obviously is a deep underlying context to some of his songs. Obviously, we mentioned All Through the Night and You're the Top, and I think they're just sort of classic songs, really. Like, and they're kind of, and they're funny. They are funny. They're kind of, they're almost like silly little ditties kind of thing. And
but are they silly little ditties, or are they cleverly constructed little ditties?
Maybe a little bit of both.
They look like silly little ditties by its being. Because I think it's because they look like they're throwaway, but they're actually. I think this is why he's considered to be sophisticated. Actually, they do just look like hack rhyming, but in fact, actually, they're not anything of the kind.
Yeah, I think if you sort of look at it at face value, that could be seen as throwaway. But maybe if you look at it a bit deeper, you're thinking, oh wow, that's someone who put all that together, all those kind of like these little things and funny references, put it all in one song and somehow made it flow. He's got to be a very clever kind of guy. And almost, I suppose you could compare him to, I know I made the reference to Importance of Being Earnest, the musical Oscar Wilde.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because he's actually quite often identified as being a Gilbert.
Okay.
As in Gilbert and Sullivan. And you can sort of see the patter songs, or certainly, the next generation of patter songs. I don't know how well you know your GNS.
A little bit.
Well, you need more then. But seriously, Gilbert's famous for his patter numbers, and when you see Cole Porter, you could just see more than almost any, more than Irving Berlin, more than the Gershwins.
Yeah.
You can see that kind of inheritance, I think, all the way through. And diction, of course, is the big thing with GNS, because there's so many syllables in the whole thing. You've got exactly the same thing with Cole Porter as well. How do you manage diction as a group, actually? That's quite interesting. As a chorus, it's actually very difficult with good consonant-based words to get that diction across.
I just think it's just down to a good musical director, really. Obviously, first things first is just to learn the song, the bones of it, really, and just to make sure we're hitting those notes. But you've got to kind of pay attention to those kind of things and just make sure you just kind of got, everyone's really responsible, really, for sort of knowing their lines, really, so to speak. And you learn a song, and then sort of a few weeks later, it's kind of like, what's that line again, kind of thing. But by obviously show week, it's like
adrenaline.
Yeah, it's nailed down, really, and so
it's drilling and drilling and drilling.
Yeah,
just to get it right.
And it's just you just got to exude confidence, and that's kind of what the production team always tries to encourage, just to be confident, know what you're doing, don't be like, I mean, for me personally, one of the songs I don't personally like myself.
That's for me.
Yeah, so there's a song that I find quite a little bit difficult, quite complex, and not always the most enjoyable one to sing, probably because of its kind of lyrical content in terms of remembering it, is Public Enemy No. 1.
Oh, the Act 2 opener.
The Act 2 opener. It's at that point where you're just trying to sort of remember your lines and just
warm up after the interval.
Yeah, and just be comfortable with it. So that one for me, just I tend to confuse sometimes.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I also think it's actually one of the weakest numbers in the score anyway. But do you know how it came to be written?
No, go on.
Well, actually, because they were desperately trying to concoct this show. They'd written Act 1, and it was in rehearsals while they were writing Act 2, double pace. They worked out what they wanted Act 2 to do. They'd written it, but they couldn't start it. They couldn't find a way of going from the interval, curtain up, into the business they needed Act 2. So they phoned Cole Porter in his hotel room, because obviously you only write when you're in a hotel room. And they basically said to him, look, unless you can find a way of starting Act 2, we're going to have to pull the plug. So he went away and wrote Public. So it's a real fill a gap, how do we start? So he went to the piano from scratch, knowing when they were aiming to, and did it that way. I'll give you one more question. Here's two questions about Cole Porter.
Yes. In
later life, he had two pets, and I can't remember if they were two cats or two dogs. This is a very easy question. What do you think they were called?
Oh, God. Buddy.
I'm afraid it's not as clever as that. They're not named after characters. They're named. One was called Anything, and one was called Goes.
Oh wow!
So what happens when I don't know if it was a cat or a dog, but what do you do when your cat comes? How do you describe that to friends? Here he comes. Who's that? Goes. And the final thing is, do you know how the show got its name as Anything Goes? You probably do know this anecdote, don't you?
I don't know the anecdote, but obviously what I associate is from the song title. It's kind of like anything does go, really, just anything, because there's so much sort of mishap and madness, and just about everything is happening on that SS American ocean liner, that Yeah, quite clearly anything goes. But
song
please.
Came after the title.
Okay.
Because apparently what happened was they were trying to block one of the actors' performances, and they said to him, instead of being on when the curtains open, do you mind coming on a few minutes afterwards? Because everything was in such disarray, you know, the story was being changed, the songs were being written, everything was up and down, and he said, oh, anything goes. I'll do it, anything goes. And they said, that's brilliant, we'll use it for the name of the show. They phoned up Cole back in his hotel room, and they said, right, the show's now called Anything Goes.
Okay.
And the next day he came in with the song. It's 24 hours to write that song.
Wow. It's quite a feat, considering how, like, obviously that is the epic song, really.
And it's still regularly covered, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't mean very much, but it's...
No, I famously know it from Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, if you're familiar with that film.
Is that the second one in the series?
The second one with where they go to India, and it starts off in a nightclub in China, I think, and they sing it. The female love interest of Indiana sings it in Chinese,
which means it must have been set in 1934 or later. Then
I would assume so. Yeah.
Can you sing it in Chinese?
I'm afraid not.
So you're putting on Anything Goes.
Yes.
How can people see this? When is it on? Where is it on? People are clamouring to know.
It's on from the 5th to the 9th of March, which is a Tuesday running up through to a Saturday, which includes a Saturday matinee. Performance times are at 7:30pm, matinee performance at 2:30pm. You can find out more information about the show. You can visit our website at www.ffbos.com. There's also a box office number, which is 0208 482 6923. There's also a ticket source line, which is pretty much ticketsource.co.uk/FFBOS, and you can also follow us on Twitter at FFBOS.
Good Lord, man, you have all the opportunities coming.
Have to take every opportunity.
Just remind us when it's on again.
The show is on 5th to the 9th of March, running from a Tuesday to a Saturday. At the Intimate Theatre in Palmer's Green, which includes a Saturday matinee.
But your group isn't going to stop there, is it? So what else have you got lined up? Because you seem to do quite a lot of musicals. Do you specialise in musicals? We do 2 musicals a year, one a spring production and one an autumn production. And we're going to be doing a fundraiser concert this May. I'm not sure the specific date of that. I know it's mid-May, but obviously just contact us and we'll tell you more information. But our next show is going to be Footloose, which is also a first for us, which is actually, I also mentioned Anything Goes is a first for us. We've never actually performed the show before. But not a vintage show in the same way.
But it's I suppose it's still iconic in terms of, 80s-ness.
And only just finished in London.
Yes, I believe so. And I suppose it could be all the rage. Because obviously Kevin Bacon, he's in all those ads. But
but despite that, go and see it.
Yeah, and also just generally, we are always on the lookout for new people to be involved in the society, whether on stage or backstage. Particularly for this production of Footloose, young people. So get in touch.
And your area is North London, is it? Edmonton, Finchley, Fryeburn, Barnet, that kind of way?
Barnet, yeah. Enfield, Palmer's Green, Potter's Bar. Anywhere
so
really.
If you're in that area, I mean, the thing is, people who like to see musical theatre, a lot of people want to be in musical theatre. We get a lot of emails about this, and amateurs are a really good way of getting into it to see if you like it, to see if you can do it. And as you say, you don't have to start on the stage.
No, exactly.
Someone's got to fall out of the gantry.
Yeah, I'm sure there's many instances where people have just been like, "Oh no, that's not me," but they've done it and they've caught the bug. I mean, myself included.
Oh really? How did you start in?
I was more that a cousin of mine we did 42nd Street, me and her, and I was sort of like interested in kind of something backstage or to help out something production-wise, But it was kind of like first rehearsal. Okay, we'll throw you in, do some tap, and it's just grown from there. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Chris, for talking about Anything Goes and your particular production of it. I'm sure it'll be a great success. And I look forward to hearing who the new breakout star's going to be. We've had Barrowman, we've had... Not that Elaine Page was really a breakout, but you get my idea.
Yep.
So, let's see who the big star of 2013 is going to be from the north of London.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Musical talk. Well, that was Chris Henry, and it was nice to meet him. And just for clarification, I didn't know whether the two pets that Cole Porter owned were cats or dogs during that interview. I've since found out that he had two cats, one called Anything and one called Goes. And do you remember before that interview I was saying that the show was seen as satirical and was trying to promote liberalism? Another thing you have to remember, of course, is 1934 is exactly the time that the Hays Code was coming in for American films, when censorship was finally being introduced into the American movie industry. And so the message of Anything Goes, attacking censorship and puritanism, would have been doubly topical at the time. And the irony of that is that only 2 years later, Anything Goes was turned into a film. But by 1936, censorship of the film industry in America was strongly being enforced. And so only 4 songs from the original score by Cole Porter were retained, and each of those had to have new lyrics to take out the naughty bits. Funnily enough, there was another film called Anything Goes, which also used some of the songs by Cole Porter, and that was made in 1956. And the odd thing about it is that Bing Crosby was in both of them. Bit more film trivia there. But that 1936 film wasn't the first time that Cole Porter's lyrics had been changed, but for a much more benign reason, because when the show came to London in 1935, it went to the Palace Theatre, which is the big theatre at Cambridge Circus where Les Miserables was for so many, many years, and Singing in the Rain is currently placed. And it opened on the 14th of June that year, ran for 261 performances, and P.G. Wodehouse was brought back, this time to anglicise some of the references in the songs which were thought to be too American for British audiences. Unfortunately, P.G. Wodehouse, though an amazing writer of lyrics and comedy books, was also a little bit right-wing in his sentiments. He was later accused of being a Nazi sympathiser, in fact, and it's true to say that there was a reference to Mussolini included in You're the Top in his revised version, but that's very clearly the work of Wodehouse and not of Cole Porter. So, just to reiterate, how can you see the Finchley and Fryer and Barnett Operatic Society version of Anything Goes? Simplicity itself. Good of you to ask. It's on between the 5th and the 9th of March 2013 at 7:30 in the evening, with one matinee at 2:45 on Saturday the 9th. Ticket price is incredibly good value, and you can get them by sending an email to tickets@ffbos.com or telephoning 020 8482 6923. And it's on at the Intimate Theatre, which is 521 Green Lanes, Palmer's Green, London. And my thanks to Chris Henry for coming to talk to me about Anything Goes and letting me show off about some of the stories that I know about it. It's a great show, go along and see it. Well, you may remember a few weeks ago in the episode when I interviewed Kit Hesketh-Harvey about his very excellent English translation production of The Magic Flute. I added a little coda at the end of the episode, just expressing a suggestion that the 1950s saw the breach between the songs used in musical theatre and pop music, which until that point in the 20th century had been one and the same. For example, the songs that Cole Porter wrote for Anything Goes were immediately recorded and went straight to the top of the then hit parade and indeed sheet music sales. So pop music was the same thing as musical theatre music. And I was suggesting that in the 1950s there was a sudden change in the way that music was recorded and orchestrated, a stronger sense of rhythm, which ultimately became the reliance on beats, which really took off in the 1960s, but rock and roll started in the 1950s. And even before that, with what would now be called easy listening music from the 1950s, there is a kind of homogeneity to the recordings, where the rhythm is set at the beginning and that's that. And if your lyrics don't fit, or the meaning no longer means quite what it did previously, then hard cheese. Which I think is very excellently illustrated by all the recordings made in the 1950s of 1920s songs, where the meaning is jettisoned. And at the end of that little discussion, I suggested that if anyone had any questions or comments to make, they might like to contact us here at Musical Talk, and I'd read out some of the good ones. Well, we did. We did get a response from a man by the name of Dominic McChesney. Thanks for contacting us, Dominic. This is what he said. I've just finished this podcast, that's the Magic Flute episode, and the 1950s pop story set something off in my mind. How does this relate to more pop artists creating musicals and jukebox musicals? Making a sweeping generalisation, for me this makes sense as to why I do not care for pop and rock and jukebox shows, as the music fails to link properly with the lyrics, as you say. There are exceptions, I suspect, but even when a pop musician writes a show, I think they cannot get away from their roots, which fundamentally does not work with what is needed in a musical. I have a feeling that this might be a can of worms, but I find this subject fascinating. As the question arises, does it also stand for shows written where the songs have the beat of pop and rock? Do you think that they end up being less than they could be? Or does it work specifically for that piece? Well, Dominic's given me a nice bit of food for thought there, and I've been having a good old chew, and if I may say a masticate, for the last few weeks, pondering it. And I have to say that I very quickly ruled jukebox musicals out. I don't think they count, because whilst jukebox musicals are retrospective pop music musicals, they are exactly that, they're retrospective. No jukebox musical is about somebody who's contemporary within the hit parade. Let's just look at one of the biggest examples. Mamma Mia, still packing them in all over the world, and we've had that excellent film version. Well, funny perhaps, but the point I'm trying to make there is that ABBA have been gone for yonks. Even when Mamma Mia opened, ABBA were popular only because they'd gone out of popularity and then come back into it. There is no arguing that ABBA were a contemporary band at the time that Mamma Mia was being written. The same is true for We Will Rock You, a rock musical based on the music of Queen. But Queen had finished for all intents and purposes. I know they linger on, but Freddie Mercury was dead and they were not in the charts. And of course one need look no further than Jersey Boys to show that this is true. You can pill for any period for your jukebox musicals except the present. So I don't think we can possibly argue that pop music and musicals in the sense of a jukebox musical are the same thing at all. Certainly in the sense of contemporary music. There might be somebody out there writing the One Direction musical, but good luck to them. However, that does leave us with the question about pop artists writing pop musicals. And I'm using pop to mean also rock musicals. In fact, you're more likely to find a rock musical than a pop musical, I think. But is the pop and rock that you find in pop and rock musicals any good? Well, I tell you what, I think it's a definitional point. Because yes, it's certainly true to say that there are some musicals which rely very heavily on rock-style music. Let's talk about Spring Awakening as a very good example. It's been described as a rock musical. And yet, I doubt many rock fans went to see it. It was clearly aimed at musical theatre goers of a younger generation who happen to like rock. But it isn't real rock. None of its songs are going to go straight up the charts. What it is, it's musical theatre music in a rock genre. And you may say, well, hang on a minute, what's the difference? Well, the answer is rock songs stand alone. They go up the charts or they don't. Musical theatre songs still have to tell the story. And so they might be heavy with beat, but I bet you a rock song from a rock musical is a lot more complicated in structure than a rock song that comes from a rock group. And can you think of any rock song, or rock style song to make a difference, that's been in a rock style musical or rock opera that's actually got into the charts? I'm afraid I can't. Then again, I'm not probably the right person because I don't spend a lot of time looking at the charts. But I'm certainly aware that in my limited capacity, I'm not aware of any musical theatre songs which have made it into the charts of any genre for a very long time. Gone are the heady days of the Phantom of the Opera. Thank you very much. And I think it's the same with Speech Monk's pop music musicals. They're not really pop music at all. They are in the style of pop music. They'll borrow some of the riffs, but they're going to be a lot more complicated, just because the musicals demand it. Even the poorest written modern musical is a lot more sophisticated than they were in the 1920s and 30s. I think we'd have to accept that. In the 1920s and 30s, people would declare themselves to be in love, and that was it. They'd then sing a song saying, I'm in love, so am I, or something to that effect. These days, whilst I'm not going to pretend for 1 second that modern music is necessarily better in its widest sense, the narrative of a musical, as I say, even a hackneyed, poorly written one, will require a bit more depth in exploring that relationship, and so the love song will have to be a bit more complicated. Once again, I'm probably not being very clear, but I think the easiest way of saying it is that the rock and the pop that you get in the charts, that's popularly heard in the street, that's making its way into pantomimes every year, that's a very good way of identifying what's really popular. The songs that make their way into British pantomime scores at Christmas. None of those have ever come from musical theatre. If they're referencing popular songs, pop music or rock music, I can assure you they'll be from a group or a singer, and they won't have come from another musical. Because the songs that you get in modern musicals which claim to be pop or rock are in fact pop style or rock style. And that is a difference. And so I'm sorry, Dominic, I think there's one thing on which I don't quite agree with you. You said that you thought when a pop musician writes a musical, they can't quite get away from writing their usual pop songs, and therefore that doesn't fit what a musical needs, and therefore the show doesn't quite work. I actually think it's something slightly different. It's a variant on that. I think they have to write outside of their normal pop because a show demands it. A musical theatre piece these days requires something a bit more. So they're writing in a pop style, but the song is probably more sophisticated, and I use that in the loosest possible sense, but the song is probably more sophisticated than they would usually be writing. So in fact, they're writing outside of their genre, which could very well be the reason that these shows often don't really succeed. Once again, I'm just putting this out there for people to agree or disagree with, and if you've got further views, Dominic, or anyone else listening thinks, hang on a minute, the old man's talking absolute nonsense again, then do please write to us here at Musical Talk and tell us where you think I'm going wrong. Always happy to hear. However, I think for the time being that's pretty much everything I've got to say. What's that? You're all shouting, thank goodness? Yes, I can well understand it. So until our paths cross again, or at least our eyes, may I say goodbye? I'm going to anyway. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and produced by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk.